I'm delighted to moderate this session here with you this morning. There was a huge demand for two former OMB hacks to come and talk to you. I do want to clarify, given the current state of the OMB-DOD relationship, we're former OMB. I was an associate director at OMB during the Bush administration. Jordan Burris was senior advisor for cybersecurity and chief of staff to the CIO. He's currently vice president of public sector strategy at Socure, which protects entities against fraudulent identities. So the federal government makes what GAO estimates to be about, or loses up to about $520 billion annually from fraud. And that's just the financial cost. That doesn't count the other things that we lose to fraud. Socure recently produced a report, Fraud in Focus, that was featured in a recent 60 Minutes report. That is a fascinating, frightening look at the extent of fraud and its impact on the federal government. So that's what we're going to talk about today. And it's really a national security issue, which is why we're featuring it at the Defense One Tech Summit. So talk about, will you, Jordan, the global picture. Your report highlights fraudulent rings in North Korea, China, Russia. Tell us what you found and what surprised you about that.
Yeah, no, thanks, Robert. And actually, I want to start with a story for folks, right? And this may seem a little sensational as I go through it, but bear with me because there's a core point to it. So imagine it's 0300 and you're at a forward operating base. Imagine that you have someone who's a foreign national working for a contractor who comes to that base, says that they're there to do some critical work in service of the mission. Could be working on a comms relay, could be helping out with a commissary for all we know. Based on everything that was presented at that moment in time, the badge that they had, the uniform, the company that they mentioned, they seemed to be the correct individual. Therefore, they were let onto the base and they were given access to the environment. Although in many of our forward bases, right, there's rules about how far that they can go and how far they can operate. The reality is what you did not know was that that person was not who they claimed to be. They actually had an identity that was stolen and was constructed 3 months prior, hired under a company that was subcontracting and working for DOD in this space. And now for the last 3 months, they've actually had access to install and implant a number of devices and things across that base and within the ecosystem. Sensational, right? That's not something that really could happen. But what if I told you that based on what we're seeing today and how the trend is evolving as it looks from our nation, from nation states and different adversaries, fraud as a strategy is now becoming the main way in which those who would do wrong are conducting what I would call digital insurgency. They're looking at opportunities where they can basically take and erode trust by permeating what it is to have ownership of your identity, be able to assert it, but also to find ways to permeate different facets or parts of the ecosystem and how they engage. So this not only can impact what would be on a forward base, but it can also be the reality of as we operate more digitally, as we operate more online, the traditional methods, the legacy methods, frankly, that have been put in place for the longest period of time. And as someone who did work on policy related to CAC, for an example, they actually no longer hold up to the new regime that we're seeing.
So you and I have been working on these issues a long time. When we've confronted executives about the threat, the response has often been, it's not an issue for me, the controls we've got in place will work. What's different about this environment, and why is it such a threat to our national security?
Right. So it's interesting. When we did our research, and for us as a company, right, we were looking at, for the government customers that we work with, where we were seeing attacks coming from, where we were seeing them being launched. And it wasn't just towards government entities. It was also towards private sector companies with the intent to not only obfuscate and create what would be shell companies that can be used to further nefarious operations, but also to create personnel and install them there for the purpose of hiring and getting access to information. What we've seen is that what you would imagine to be the case today, you would have, nation state actors coming from North Korea, from Russia, from China. The things that you may not have seen is that it's also Latvia, it's also parts of Africa, generally as AI is making technology or making access to some of the tools that fraudsters or these digital insurgents would use more accessible. Unfortunately, we're seeing more and more countries with fraud rings spinning up that are seeking to compromise. So what's failing? Frankly, some of the ways our traditional thinking has been around the identity equation and how we've approached it is what is starting to fail us, right? The amount of times I've heard any organization talk about, hey, if you answer these 3 questions about your personal background, where you last lived, the color of your car, or maybe your mortgage, who has that, that you are somehow who you claim to be. The reality is, everyone who deals in fraud today has access to that information. When I've heard such things as, well, if you have the credential, be it a CAC and, federal civilian, it's the PIV, et cetera. If you have this, you therefore must be who you claim to be. The reality is that they're actually moving further upstream so that way they can have this credential issued to them as part of the initial vetting process. And then when you say, okay, well, we're working with a trusted contractor, someone who's been doing business with us for 20 plus years, therefore they must vet their people very well. The reality is that today, and again, this is something we actually featured another research report about what we've seen within our own enterprises. We've had North Koreans attempting to infiltrate our engineering teams. The reality is that they are very sophisticated. They're leveraging every piece of technology available, everything from deepfakes to real humans who have completely fabricated their existence in order to basically engage and get access to the enterprise. So the traditional thinking no longer works, which means that the way in which we approach this problem, the way we combat this problem, also has to evolve.
So how would you characterize adoption of modern identity verification technology techniques in the federal government today? And what are the barriers to getting there? Why hasn't the federal government more quickly adopted what the private sector has in terms of identity verification? Yeah,
absolutely. So I think this is a matter of timing and we're going to say recency of the challenge or the issue at hand. The reality here is that, I would say many of us and many of you who work around the identity ecosystem or in digital services today have probably been screaming from the rafters, saying something to the effect of it's not working in the way you once thought it was. The reality is that there hasn't been as much momentum. There hasn't been as much interest in looking to safeguard it. There's been this premise that we've basically had everything buttoned up because it hasn't failed us just yet. The reality is we just don't know how badly it is failing us in many cases, especially as I engage more with government leaders. There's also been questions on, financing, relevancy to the mission. For me, trust is important, and delivering trust at the speed of relevance is all that matters when we're talking about how do we confirm that on every aspect of the mission, right? Whether it's engaging directly with the warfighter or even with their families who are seeking to engage in some way digitally as well, that they're well protected. These are all things that must be addressed, and where we're seeing again kind of this slow to move response starting to impact us more broadly.
Do you have faith that we can accelerate adoption as fast as the fraudsters are modifying their tactics?
Of course I have faith. That's why I'm here. Look, the truth is that yes, we can, and it's an imperative. What I'm encouraged by today, even the panel before us, we were talking about autonomy, or we were talking about AI and things along those lines, is that now there's the right conversations that are starting to happen about how we must adapt. But I want you to imagine that, again, we're dealing with adversaries, we're dealing with folks who do not care or do not have, we're going to say, norms about how they leverage technology. And in many cases, they operated as a business. For an example, we were monitoring what would be Chinese fraud ring or the nation state itself as it was operating. And what we found is that we would see spikes in hits towards both infrastructure within the U.S., but then also commercially, all within what would be a normal working day. And so they've now made it their mission and their business to see how much that they can automate, how much they can use technologies and automated tools to scale these attacks as quickly as possible, and then make sure that it's, proliferated, and just do this as part of the normal business. I think the U.S. and I think more importantly the federal government has the opportunity to further lean in, especially with direction that's coming out around, leaning into things like artificial intelligence in order to combat them, because it's the only way that we're actually going to be able to get ahead of what we're seeing today. So
you talked about the fraudsters using AI. You use AI, biometrics, behavioral analytics, something called liveness detection.
Mm-hmm.
Can you talk about how Socure incorporates that into a sort of a holistic approach here?
Yeah, sure thing. So I think we'll take a step back about what it means to assert who you are online and really break it down. It's a matter of not only the PII, the information that you assert about yourself, but there's other signals, there's other intelligence. I view identity and really the work that we're having to do now in this space as being an ISR based specifically around identity intelligence and thinking of it along those lines, right? There's many of those who would talk about zero trust way back in the day, right? Well, the whole premise of that was verifying someone at the end of the day. Well, we have to think broader than just the people in the enterprise. We have to think about those who are engaging, those who are working with us jointly in the mission. So from the way we approach it, we understand that there are many facets that present or contribute to the way someone presents themselves online. And or in person, right? It's not just their PII. It's not just their visual image. It's also the devices that they are using. It's also the contact channels that they are using. It's also understanding patterns by which somehow things can occur that are impossible to happen. For an example, if I'm going to log in and try to create or register for a service and I'm here in DC and simultaneously the exact same thing is happening in California, either I have invented teleportation and we should all invest in that company, or someone has basically pretended to be me at the end of the day. And for all you know, I could even be the one who's the fraudster and not the real individual.
Okay. What's the single greatest change in mindset in the federal government that you'd like to see in this arena?
Yeah, so as we continue to talk about, enhancements, as we continue to talk about how the mission is evolving, I want to bring it back to the fact that, again, with fraud being now the new battlefield or part of the battlefield today, your identity strategy, the way we're thinking about how we're verifying and validating all aspects, whether the businesses that we're engaging with, right, all the way up to the supply chain, the individuals who are working for those businesses, and how they're engaging, right? Or even the people that are engaged and how we're even protecting those who work within the federal ecosystem or the families within DoD, for an example. These are all things that must be mission critical. These are all things that must be discussed and on the table. Because frankly, if at the end of the day we've ignored it, nothing else matters. If we lose trust in that the person or the entity we're engaging with is who they claim to be, then the entire mission is lost to begin with.
Well, that's it. Thanks for your sponsorship. Thanks for being here, and most of all for what you're doing on a daily basis. So get back out there.
All right.
Thanks, everybody.